If you've been drawing for a while, one of the worst things you can encounter is the dreaded art block. You want to draw, or at least you think you do. For some reason, you can't quite get yourself to pick up a pencil, or maybe you can't even think of anything to draw. Or even if you are drawing, for some reason, none of the drawings are coming out properly. How can you fix this? How can you overcome art block? So this is something that has happened to me countless times. It's been a really long day at my day job, which has nothing to do with art. Maybe school, in your case. I don't really get a lot of free time to draw, so when I finally get off work, I'm excited to get started. I really want to draw, I feel like I should draw, I need to draw to get better at it. But for whatever reason, I just can't get myself to do it. Why the heck does this happen? Well, for me, there were a lot of different reasons. One of the main ones was that I was scared. I was fearful that my drawing wasn't going to turn out how I wanted. Essentially, I had a major fear of failure, and that's not easy to overcome. But it's something I had to accept eventually. After all, failure is one of the best teachers. And that's easy to say, but failure is scary. Because what if I actually picked up a pencil and started drawing and failed? What then? Well, then I realized I guess I'd have a bad drawing. I then realized that failing at a single drawing was probably one of the best ways to face my fear of failure. Making a single bad drawing doesn't mean I'm a bad person, it doesn't even mean I'm a bad artist. But what if it's not just one bad drawing? What if I failed at making a good drawing? Forever? How do you know if you'll ever be good at art? There's just so much to learn and it's overwhelming. To be honest, I don't think anyone ever knows if they'll be as good at art as they want to be. I know I sure don't. And I've made peace with that realization. You can try to maximize your chances, but honestly, nobody really knows whether they'll succeed at something before they try. I may not ever become a great artist, only the best artist I can be. And that's okay. Besides, learning art takes a really long time. I learned that I had to be patient and that I was putting too much pressure on myself. The artists that I admired so much had spent maybe decades on their craft. Me? Nowhere near as long. And I'm just a normal person. It's fine if it takes me a while. But then again, accepting failure is a lot easier said than done. It was really difficult for me to avoid putting a lot of pressure on myself every time I picked up a pencil. But I found a couple of ways to reduce that pressure. For example, not really having a clearly defined goal for each drawing. Just doodling and drawing without expecting too much from myself. Another way of reducing pressure is finding friends to draw with on apps like magma.com or Gartic Phone. All these things helped, but unfortunately, it wasn't the only thing that was stopping me from drawing. So I used to work as a software engineer, and sometimes product would be on fire and I'd be scrambling to get everything working. And more often than not, when I got home, I was completely exhausted. On top of that, being depressed also did no favors for my energy level. But since I started learning art so late, I felt like I had to do it every day to catch up to everyone else. I also had a bad habit of connecting my self-worth to art-related productivity, so the less I managed to do, the worse I felt. And the worse I felt, the less I was able to do. Okay, now, some people might not want to hear this, but in my experience, looking for ways to force myself to do things in spite of the exhaustion didn't work too well for me. In fact, it led to a pretty extended period of burnout. I had better luck trying to address the root cause of the depression and exhaustion, which is not something a YouTube video can fix. To my absolute chagrin, things like working out, getting sunlight, eating well, and sleeping properly were actually really helpful for my energy levels. And of course, all of this depends on each person's individual circumstances. For some people, it might not be realistic to aim for rapid progression in art because it's incredibly time-consuming. But let's say all that wasn't a problem. Sometimes I had motivation and energy, but I still wasn't able to draw. And that was because I had no idea what I wanted to draw. I was just drawing a blank whenever I tried to think of something. I just didn't have inspiration. But hold on a second, what even is inspiration? How do people even think of things to create? Ideas just don't appear out of a vacuum. For me, it was unlikely that I could just sit in a room and conjure ideas out of nowhere. For me to be able to generate ideas, I first had to nourish my brain. In other words, I had to consume media that inspired me or even go out and have new experiences. Besides, you don't necessarily always have to draw completely original things. You can draw something for a friend or acquaintance. There's no shortage of people out there looking for art of something. You can draw fan art of your favorite media. And one really good reason for having an OC, or original character, is that if all else fails, you could always just draw them. Personally, since I find my own art skills lacking, I'm happy to do studies or practice things that I find challenging to draw. You don't really need to be inspired to do this. But at this point, I think I should make a confession. Lacking motivation, or energy, or inspiration, these were all problems I had, but that was in the past. I don't really struggle that much with this nowadays. Does that mean I don't get art block? Does that mean I draw for hours and hours every single day? Well, also no. At the time of writing, I haven't touched a pencil for about a month. I'm very busy playing video games. See, one thing I don't do is that I don't guilt trip myself if I need a break or if I simply don't feel like drawing. Because when I do draw, I tend to get a slightly different kind of art block. So picture this. I'm ready and I'm excited to draw. And I start drawing. The first drawing doesn't really turn out well, but that's okay. I just move on to the next one. But the second one isn't good either. Or the third. Or any of the other ones. It feels like there's some kind of mental block in my brain that's preventing me from drawing how I usually do. What's going on? One thing I had to realize is that drawing is sometimes a little bit like sports. How well you perform can vary depending on your condition. If you're unwell or tired, you might not be able to perform at your best. But there's also a little element of randomness as well. Some drawings you just seem to luck out and end up with something way beyond what your current skill level should be able to achieve. And sometimes it's the opposites. You can mitigate this randomness with study and practice, but I don't think you can ever really completely get rid of it. I think of this randomness a little bit like a gacha game. You can check this video right here for more detail. I left a link in the description. But anyway, I learned that some days I'm just not able to perform optimally, and that's normal. But some people might think that this doesn't quite make sense. Aren't there professional artists out there that draw every single day for work? They seem to be able to overcome this randomness or lack of motivation and seem to be able to avoid art block entirely. What's their secrets? So I really don't have much experience as a professional artist myself, just a few months, but I did talk to a bunch of real pros to see how they deal with the issue. One suggestion that came up a few times was to have a concrete drawing process. If you approach every drawing the exact same way, it frees up your mind from having to figure out what to do next, and it makes it easier to replicate past work. Another thing is that they tend to disconnect the process of drawing from motivation or energy levels entirely. Remember, as much as you might love drawing, as a professional artist, this is how you pay your bills. Even if you don't want to, or even if you're tired, you're still going to have to go to work. But what about the problem of not being able to draw well that day? I think one thing that some people don't realize is that pro artists are accustomed to not always drawing in their tip-top best condition. Deadlines aren't going to wait for your condition, so they do the best that they can in that moment. It's just that their level is so high is that even if they're not in the best condition, they can still put out really great work. Anyway, art block can be a little tricky to talk about because it seems like everyone understands it slightly differently. I did my best to cover as many definitions as I could think of, but if I missed any, feel free to let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you next time. Bye-bye!